Well, I made a bit of a promise that, along with a lot of the stuff I'm doing, I was going to do Trial of a Time Lord, but I feel we need to do kind of an introduction video to Trial of a Time Lord, because it's an interesting part in the show's history. Not only for the fact that it's one of the few times in the classic series they did not just a story arc, but literally do one story labeled as under one title, though broken up into 4 separate acts. The 4 acts we'll review in their own separate videos, and a whole wrap-up of the story itself we'll do in a final video. But to kind of give you the idea here, I want to kind of give my personal opinion of what I think of Trial. Now, this is really before I've seen it all. I'm recording this weeks before I'm doing any of the other videos, before I've seen pretty much any of it. I've seen only one story and wasn't really paying attention to the Trial stuff because I was just paying attention to the Vervoid part of it. And I have begun watching it, but basically I don't have a full opinion on the story itself. So this video is going to act like just a brief idea about why the story fascinates me, and to kind of discuss how, in some ways, it was kind of, another step to the end for the classic series. And I hope I can try and generate some kind of, thought, or at least give you a weird juxtaposition to after, this is clearly me before I've seen it all, to me after I've seen it all. So, let's try this faithful experiment, shall we? Well, okay. At the end of Colin Baker's first season, the BBC head honcho Michael Grade had his sights on the series. He took his first shot because the show had fallen considerably in the ratings in the past several years, and he thought the show was silly, stupid, and started talking about canceling it. And the thing that was probably the crux of why, and I'm not even going to lie, his first season was terrible was because, well, the story before the full season, Twin Dilemma, which I have reviewed, I'm not going to at all lie that it's a great story. I can't even say it's a good story, but it's something I like watching because Colin Baker's performance is good enough to propel it. Unfortunately, the rest of England at the time didn't feel that, and that led to a full series of odd decisions, including making the Doctor very unlikable, which, personally, I like that part of Colin. It makes him different, and I thought it was a bold move, moving the tone of the show to a noticeably darker, more typical of the 80s kind of sadistic feel, a lot like Vengeance on Varos, which I kind of scratched the surface on. So you can kind of understand with all that why people were jumping ship. The show had gotten weak and weird and strange, and was definitely a far cry from, just the season before, and even Tom Baker and a lot of stuff before it. It was definitely, the worst shape the show had been compared. Sylvester McCoy would eventually jump in, and some people would argue that at least his first season's worse. I haven't seen every story of his first season, so I'm not going to comment on that right now, but suffice to say, Colin Baker's first season was the opening shots, and Trial was basically the beginning of a 4-year journey to finally putting the nails in the coffin and resting it for good until completely in 2005. Now, I'm going to be honest. The idea of the concept of Trial, is kind of melodramatic when you think about it, because at the time the show was on trial. It was trying to fight to survive and come back. I mean, the show was on the threat of cancellation, like I said, and the head producer, John Nathan Turner, managed to actually, save the show, though put it on an 18-month hiatus. And that meant that they had to completely dump the plans they had, which most of them have been turned into audio dramas, which I want to get my hands on, of course. But again, that they had to completely think of something else, which led to Trial. And plus, again, it's this giant metaphor. Oh, the Doctor's on trial. His entire show's on trial. Oh, look at the clever, incredibly transparent ruse. Now, again, it's melodramatic, but I think it's a very awesome idea. As a concept, Trial of Time Lord captured my imagination when I first heard about it. When I became aware of the classic series and was learning a lot more about the history, which I probably know way too much about now, when I came across how this worked, not just its history, which, to be fair, hell, the show's backstage history is almost more entertaining than its actual story history. Oh boy, the stories can go on. It's just a concept that's an interesting idea. Put the Doctor on trial for an entire season and by his own people. That makes sense. I mean, I know there's something like that in the War Games, but again, that was just the end of a story. This is a whole season of him struggling to, not have something terrible happen to him. It's kind of cool because, once in a while I like watching courtroom drama. If a rerun of Law and Order is on, I'll definitely watch it, so I like the idea. It's a lot different from what I was used to in the classic show, because the classic show is very much a fun sci-fi adventure, with a lot of horror in it. Here, the main thing linking everything together is good old-fashioned courtroom drama, and up front, that's a cool idea. Then you have to figure out how to get the stuff wrapped around, which seems kind of like a challenge. Another thing is the story itself is a very interesting thing to talk about. For one thing, it has so many different little, let's say, sad historical moments. You kind of see John Nathan Turner's disillusion with, at the time, script editor Eric Sayward. To the point where, and I'll explain it as these videos go on, it burned badly, and Eric Sayward still isn't really forgiving John Nathan Turner. And John Nathan Turner's been dead since 03, I think, or if not 04. He's been long past for a long while, and Sayward still kind of has some venom against him. Not to mention, it was the swan song for Colin Baker's television run, which no one can really lie, that was mostly a failure. Some stories that were likable here and there, and his performance carried it on. Again, it got me through Twin Dilemma, which if a weaker actor took on, I probably would have instantly said, "You're gotta never watch this again." If I honestly had the opportunity, which I can since I have the power of the internet, I'd probably watch Twin Dilemma again just to see Colin act over the top. Another notable thing is this is the last thing Robert Holmes worked on. Now, Robert Holmes, I've done a good chunk of reviews for him. He's probably one of the best writers the show ever had, and it's understandable why. The man on a great day was a genius, and his worst story I've seen so far is The Sunmakers. It's a pretty average story. It's very preachy, agreeably, but at least it's not over the top terrible. I just can't fully recommend it like a lot of his other stuff because the story's very standard and the cast isn't lifting it up at all. And that's the thing. I have a great opinion of Robert Holmes at the moment. If I ever watch The Space Pirates, that might shift a little because The Space Pirates is considered one of his worst. But until now, the worst is The Sunmakers, and I can still stomach that entirely. And it's very interesting that his whole season is not only the last things Holmes ever completed, the last 2 episodes of Trial were the last thing he ever worked on before his death. Kind of adds a little eeriness to it, maybe even makes it a little awkward. And after this, there'd be a new Doctor, a new script editor, and one of the shining beacons of Doctor Who was gone forever. Trial is the start of the inevitable cancellation, and represents a really significant turning point in a show that was once considered a gem a gem of the BBC. By this point in its history, it was universally criticized and reviled. Trial is definitely a representation of everyone's attempt to recapture the hearts and minds of every Doctor Who fan out there. Everyone on board needed to make a concerted effort to turn out the best show they could. But again, could they win over everyone after, a pretty weak season, trying to be dark, nightmarish, basically be some would consider a perversion of a beloved show? Would it be possible to get it back to its glory days? No. Hell no. And that's why it's meriting discussion. The fact that, they tried anytime, they tried to actually get the show back. And, again, they tried doing something interesting. Doing this long story that had a 4-act structure, and put the Doctor through a giant challenge. Challenge that, though, to be fair, he'd probably survive because his name's in the title, still would see him try to defend himself and see some very interesting moments happen to him on the way. But enough of this bluthering. Let's get to the stories, well, from the future's point of view.